The morning light streamed through the windows of the shelter, casting a warm glow over Ada as she sat by the window, watching the world awaken. It had been months since she first arrived, broken and unsure if she would ever heal. Now, though the scars of her past remained, her heart was lighter. She was finally starting to feel whole again. Pastor Emmanuel had become a steady presence in her life, guiding her not just with his words but with his actions. Through his encouragement, Ada had begun volunteering at the shelter, helping new women who arrived with the same haunted eyes she once carried. Each story she heard reminded her of her own, but now, she spoke words of hope she never thought she'd have. "You're not alone," she would tell them. "It gets better. I promise." One day, Pastor Emmanuel approached Ada with a proposal. "We are holding a gathering at the church this weekend," he said. "Would you be willing to share your story?" Ada hesitated. The thought of standing in front of a crowd, exposing her pain, was terrifying. But she also knew how much it would mean to the women who were still struggling to see the light. "I'll do it," she said softly, her voice steady. The day of the gathering arrived, and Ada stood nervously behind the church doors. The room was filled with people, men, women, and even children, who had come to hear stories of hope and redemption. Pastor Emmanuel stood beside her, his hand a reassuring weight on her shoulder. "You're ready," he said with a smile. "Just speak from your heart." When Ada stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Her hands trembled, but she took a deep breath and began. "I'm Ada," she said, her voice echoing through the space. "And for a long time, I thought my story was over. I thought I was lost forever." She spoke of her father's death, her mother's unknowing betrayal, and the horrors she endured at the hands of her stepfather and the traffickers. Tears welled in her eyes as she recounted the nights she spent praying for an escape, thinking no one would hear her. "But someone did hear me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Even in the darkest moments, there was a light, a small, flickering light that refused to go out. And that light brought me here." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Ada stepped off the stage, her heart pounding but filled with pride. Several women approached her afterward, their faces filled with gratitude. "You gave me hope," one of them said, tears streaming down her face. "If you can heal, maybe I can too." Months turned into years, and Ada continued to grow. She took classes, learned new skills, and eventually began working full-time at the shelter. Her past no longer defined her. Instead, it became the foundation for her purpose. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. One evening, as she and Pastor Emmanuel sat in the shelter courtyard, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Ada," he began, "I've watched you transform over these years. You've become a beacon of hope for so many, including me. I've been praying about this, and I feel led to ask, would you allow me to walk this journey with you? As your husband?" Ada's eyes widened, her heart pounding. For a moment, she was speechless. Then, a soft smile spread across her face, and she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that." Their wedding was a celebration unlike any the shelter had ever seen. The courtyard was decorated with flowers and lights, and the woman Ada had helped stood proudly by her side. As she walked down the aisle, dressed in a simple white gown, she felt the weight of her past lift completely. She was stepping into a new chapter, one filled with love, purpose, and freedom. As Pastor Emmanuel took her hand and made his vows, Ada looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family. She realized that her journey, though painful, had led her to something beautiful. Years later, Ada and Pastor Emmanuel continued their work, expanding the shelter and opening new ones in nearby towns. Together, they became a source of hope for countless others, proving that even in the darkest shadows, redemption's light could shine.